penthouse apartment, bathed in the cool, distant gold of a Manhattan sunset, felt like the perfect trophy of their 10 years. Daniel watched his wife, Olivia, laugh into her phone, a sound that used to belong only to him, but the way her thumb hovered over the screen before locking it, the almost imperceptible flinch when he walked into the room, was a discordant note in their perfect symphony. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the heavy, pressurized quiet of an airtight vault holding a secret too dangerous to breathe. If fragments of a devastating truth hidden behind polished surfaces resonate with you, stay with me. There are many more dangerous reflections in the windows of this story, and you won't want to miss a single shattered piece. The aroma of burnt sage and cedarwood, meant to evoke West Coast calm in their sleek, high-rise Manhattan apartment, did little to soothe the tremor in Daniel Hayes's hand. 10 years. 10 years of building a life, or perhaps just a facade, in this architectural masterpiece overlooking Central Park, a life dominated by his wife Olivia's ascendant career. She was the CEO, the face of media's cutting edge, the one whose success paid for the sage, the cedar, and the view. Daniel, the architect who preferred silence and sketching to press conferences, often felt like an expensive fixture in his own home. Tonight, a fragile peace had settled over the city. A muted siren wailed miles below, a lonely, familiar sound. Olivia was in their walk-in closet, her voice low and efficient on a business call, a common occurrence. But the rhythm of her responses felt practiced, slightly too smooth. Daniel stood by the minimalist kitchen island, nursing a glass of a single malt whiskey he couldn't fully taste. He shouldn't have gone into her briefcase, but the unease had been a gnawing cancer for months, starting with the late-night texts she would delete and the sudden defensive glare in her eyes. He remembered the file, a confidential pitch deck for a major acquisition. He'd flipped through it, not out of suspicion, but professional curiosity. That's when he saw it. Buried deep, renamed Marketing Strategy B, was a folder containing one blurry photo and a thread of WhatsApp messages that went back 18 months. The photo was of Olivia's hand, recognizable by the slender gold band she wore, resting on the forearm of a man whose expensive watch and tailored cuff identified him immediately. Ethan Vance, her biggest rival turned partner on the project, a man who had once publicly dismissed Daniel's designs as quaint but lacking scale. The messages were clinical, damning. His pitch was fine, Liv, just lacks the edge. Doesn't he ever get tired of playing it safe? And Olivia's reply, a single sentence that had carved itself into Daniel's core. He's comfortable, Ethan. That's the problem. And comfort is boring. It wasn't just the betrayal of the flesh. It was the contempt, the casual, surgical dismissal of his entire existence. Comfort is boring. His work, his gentle nature, his quiet ambition, all reduced to a tedious obstacle in her relentless pursuit of edge. Olivia emerged from the closet, her sharp, tailored suit replaced by a silk robe, her face immaculate. She paused, catching the way Daniel was staring, not at her, but through her, at the city lights reflecting in the amber whiskey. "Everything all right, love?" she asked, the voice too bright, too casual. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at the golden band on her finger, the same one resting on Ethan Vance's arm in the photo, and felt a tidal wave of self-loathing. He had been so blind, so trusting. He looked around the apartment, the symbol of their success, and understood it wasn't a home. It was a museum of his mediocrity in her eyes. "Just tired," Daniel finally said, the lie a dry, scraping sound in his throat. He set the glass down with a nearly silent thud. I think I need a change of scenery. A real one. It was not the confrontation he should have delivered. It was the first step in a quiet, brutal execution of his own life here. The ultimate act of self-preservation, to vanish before he was fully erased. He would not give her the satisfaction of a fight. He would simply cease to exist in her world. The divorce was not a messy spectacle, which, Daniel thought, was perhaps the crueler outcome. It was a transaction, quick and clean, lubricated by Olivia's lawyers who treated the entire affair like a simple reallocation of assets. Daniel, in his profound apathy, accepted terms that were far less than equitable, allowing Olivia to retain the lion's share of their joint wealth and all their Manhattan properties. He signed the papers not with a pen, but with the cold, heavy realization that his dignity was already forfeit. He simply wanted out of the echo chamber, where his life had been deemed boring. "You're making a mistake, Daniel," Olivia had stated in the sterile, windowless conference room, her voice devoid of any genuine emotion, sounding more like she was closing out a subpar quarter. "You could fight this. You know you're entitled to more." He looked up, meeting her gaze for the last time. "I'm entitled to a life where I'm not constantly measured against your ambition, Olivia. Keep the money. It's the least I can do for your comfort." He walked out and left Daniel Hayes behind. His only confidant, Gabriel, a college friend who had found success in tech but remained fiercely loyal, met him at JFK 3 weeks later. Daniel carried only one worn leather duffel bag. Everything else, the custom suits, the expensive art, the architectural awards, was abandoned. "Seattle? Seriously?" Gabriel asked, his voice low with concern as they sat in the airport bar, waiting for the red-eye. "Starting fresh isn't enough, Gabe," Daniel said, swirling the ice in his glass. His eyes, usually warm and hesitant, now held a dull, dangerous glint. "I need to be untraceable. If I fail in the dark. If I succeed, it won't be the success of Daniel Hayes, the architect who lost everything. It will be the success of a man no one has ever heard of." He revealed the new legal documents. "Andrew Keller," he stated, testing the name on his tongue. Andrew, his mother's maiden name. Keller, a solid, unpretentious name. Andrew Keller. It had a ring of quiet competence, a man who built things to last, not just for show. Gabriel studied him. "That's a big sacrifice, man. You're cutting out a decade." "The only thing of value from the last decade was that contempt," Daniel countered, his voice flat. "I'm holding on to it. It's fuel. Comfort is boring." "That's what she said, Gabe. That's what they think. I will make them realize that true power is never comfortable." The flight was long and shadowed. Daniel sat by the window, watching the fractured landscape below. He didn't sleep. He wasn't mourning the marriage. He was systematically dismantling the old identity, brick by excruciating brick. He recalled Ethan Vance's smug face during that long-ago pitch, the subtle smirk when Olivia sided with him, and the final crushing message. Every slight, every moment of feeling inadequate was crystallized into a single, unbreakable core of resolve. Seattle was damp and smelled of pines and possibility. It was the antithesis of Manhattan's sterile, vertical ambition. Daniel, now Andrew, rented a small, unassuming apartment and started working almost immediately. He embraced the architectural world of sustainability and green technology, a sector Olivia and her crowd considered idealistic and small-scale. He poured his shame into code and blueprints, working 18 hours a day. He didn't network. He built. He made no friends. he hired talent. The first 6 months were a blur of cheap takeout and relentless effort. He looked into the mirror and saw Andrew Keller, leaner, harder around the edges, his eyes aged 10 years in 10 months. He was a machine fueled by the memory of a private conversation in a sterile room. His ex-wife's confession that he lacked edge. He was becoming that edge, sharp, cold, and forged in the very fire of her contempt. He vowed that the next time, if ever, their paths crossed, it would be on his terms. He wouldn't be standing in the shadow of her success. She would be looking up at the edifice he had built in the silent, humbling years of his exile. A decade is enough time to rewrite history, to erase a man and forge a legend. Andrew Keller, at 45, was a fortress of quiet, absolute authority. The soft-spoken architect who once deferred to his wife's ambition was replaced by a financial powerhouse whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless efficiency in the sustainable development sector. His headquarters in Seattle, a glass monument to environmental consciousness, stood in stark contrast to the aggressive, gilded towers of New York. This was his kingdom, built on the foundations of shame and the cold calculus of proving a point. Andrew maintained a meticulously private life. His public profile was polished, philanthropic, focused, unattainable. He owned the anonymity that the pseudonym afforded him, guarding his past like a state secret. Only Gabriel, who handled his international legal affairs, knew the scar tissue beneath the tailored suits. The only unexpected crack in the fortress was Clara. She was the antithesis of the New York life. Clara was a landscape architect and a staunch environmental activist, advocating for genuine community engagement rather than just greenwashing. They met during a difficult negotiation over parkland preservation. She hadn't been intimidated by his name or his net worth. She had simply been fiercely committed to the trees. Their relationship was slow burn, intellectual, and deeply rooted in shared values about building a better world. The values Daniel had always held, buried deep beneath the anxieties of his former marriage. Clara saw Andrew as a complex, powerful man striving for good. She saw his intensity as passion, not pain. One drizzling Tuesday evening, while sitting in his minimalist suburban home overlooking Puget Sound, Clara observed the way Andrew instinctively pulled away when she tried to take a photo of him for her personal journal. "You're allergic to cameras, aren't you, Andrew?" she teased gently, though a genuine curiosity underscored her voice. Andrew smiled, a practiced movement that rarely reached his eyes. "They capture things incorrectly, Clara. They freeze a moment out of context." He paused, the lie heavy on his tongue. They might capture Daniel's ghost. "Or maybe," she countered, sipping her tea, "you're afraid of being truly seen." The observation was too sharp, too close to the truth that his life was a meticulously managed construct. The greatest danger wasn't financial ruin. It was the revelation that he, Andrew Keller, the successful, uncompromising titan, was merely a second draft of a man named Daniel Hayes, who had been called boring and cast aside. He often thought about Olivia and Ethan. Gabriel occasionally let slip fragmented news. They were married, thriving in the New York media landscape, still the power couple. The thought no longer brought the sharp, debilitating agony of the initial betrayal. Now it was a dull, constant hum, a reminder of the ultimate debt he intended to collect. He wasn't seeking their destruction, merely their recognition of his unassailable worth. Yet, holding Clara's hand, looking out at the vast, calming water, the years of cold ambition felt heavy. The revenge he craved was a heavy suit of armor, and Clara was the one person who made him want to take it off. But if he did, what would she see? The powerful Andrew or the discarded Daniel? The silence of the last 10 years was his greatest asset, but it was becoming the most profound obstacle to a genuine life. The email arrived on a Tuesday, filtered through Andrew's executive assistant, and then prioritized by Gabriel. Andrew stared at the sender's address on the screen of his bespoke mahogany desk. Vance Hayes Media. The corporate logo, still the same sleek, aggressively modern font Olivia had designed, felt like a deliberate, cruel joke from the universe. The content was standard corporate boilerplate, a request for an urgent strategic investment meeting concerning a pivotal expansion project, highlighting Andrew Keller's unique expertise in integrating sustainable tech with large-scale development. They were desperate, and their desperation smelled familiar. Andrew didn't need to read the full pitch to understand the subtext. The project was hemorrhaging capital, threatening the stability of the entire firm. A decade ago, Daniel Hayes would have felt a surge of pity, perhaps even a ridiculous, foolish urge to help. Andrew Keller felt only a sharp, satisfying click of realization. The debt was coming due. He forwarded the email to Gabriel with a single line. "Schedule it. Manhattan. My terms." Gabriel called back within the hour, his tone a mix of caution and disbelief. "Are you sure about this, Andrew? It's them. Ethan Vance and Olivia Hayes. You know they'll be there. This is a risk." "It's not a risk, Gabe. It's a closing argument," Andrew replied, his voice flat and perfectly controlled. The emotional distance he had cultivated over 10 years was his greatest shield. They don't need to know the name Daniel Hayes. They need to know Andrew Keller, the man who controls the capital they require. They will see me as a force, not a forgotten husband. And if Olivia recognizes you, it's been 10 years, but people don't forget that easily. Andrew glanced at his reflection in the dark glass of the window. A man whose soft contours had been sharpened into angles, whose tentative posture had been replaced by a granite stillness. The few lines around his eyes were not worry lines, but lines of focus. She won't. She never truly saw Daniel Hayes. She only saw the comfort he represented. Andrew Keller represents something else entirely. Power. She'll be too blinded by the light to see the shadow. He agreed to meet them in the corporate tower of a close associate, ensuring the venue would be neutral, sterile, and unequivocally controlled by his own influence. The meeting was set for the following week. That evening, Andrew had dinner with Clara. She talked passionately about a newly discovered species of moss she hoped to incorporate into a community garden project. He listened, truly listened, to the melody of her enthusiasm, and the contrast between her world and the mercenary arena he was about to re-enter felt jarring. "You seem preoccupied," Clara observed, setting down her fork. "Is the New York trip necessary?" Andrew managed a convincing sigh of executive fatigue. "High-stakes investment, Clara. It's a necessary evil, a potential merger that could revolutionize how we approach urban density. Big picture stuff." He carefully omitted the names. He could lie about business without feeling the profound guilt he'd felt when deceiving his former self. But lying to Clara felt like compromising the very man he had fought so hard to become. As he packed his bags for New York, he found an old, faded photograph at the bottom of a seldom-used drawer, a picture of him and Gabriel from college. A ghost of the old, naive Daniel smiled back. He stared at it for a long minute, then flipped it face down. He stepped onto the private jet, a symbol of the scale Olivia had once claimed he lacked, and felt a chilling anticipation. He wasn't returning for vengeance. He was returning for validation. and he knew with chilling certainty that he would extract it in full. The conference room was a pristine cube of glass and polished steel, suspended high above the chaos of Midtown Manhattan. Andrew Keller arrived first, impeccably tailored and radiating an aura of disciplined patience. He selected the seat at the head of the long table. The city skyline spread out behind him like a backdrop to his own quiet coronation. This was the stage where he would exchange contempt for control. Gabriel arrived shortly after, offering a quick, nervous nod. "They're on their way up, Andrew. Remember the plan. Objective, dispassionate. You're a vendor, not an exorcist." Andrew gave no reply, instead focusing on the financial reports laid out before him. Reports that detailed, with brutal clarity, the slow, agonizing decline of Vance Hayes Media. The irony was a bitter, exhilarating taste in his mouth. The double doors whispered open, and they walked in. Olivia and Ethan Vance. Olivia looked older, the sharpness of her ambition having etched faint lines of stress around her mouth. She still wore power with elegance, but her eyes held a restless, almost hunted look. Ethan, standing beside her, still possessed the arrogant bearing of a man who believed the world owed him its admiration, though the forced geniality in his smile suggested deep anxiety. They extended their hands, practicing the polite formality of the financial world. "Mr. Keller, thank you for making time for us. I'm Ethan Vance. This is my wife and partner, Olivia Hayes." Ethan's voice was smooth, patronizingly confident. Andrew took his hand, the contact brief and firm. He met Olivia's gaze last, and then the mask cracked. Not his, but theirs. It began with a subtle hitch in Olivia's breathing, a rapid, almost imperceptible widening of her pupils as her brain struggled to reconcile the powerful, unfamiliar presence with the ghost of the man she had discarded. Ethan, slower to register the emotional shock, merely frowned at the familiar shape of his jawline. Andrew did not flinch. He did not smile, nor did he allow any residual hatred to touch his gaze. He simply looked at them, not as enemies, but as petitioners, with the cool, impartial scrutiny of a predator assessing its prey. "Please, have a seat, Miss Hayes, Mr. Vance," Andrew said. His voice was deeper, controlled, devoid of the old, tentative warmth. The decade of silence had stripped away the accent of the man who was comfortable. Ethan, recovering first, though his face was visibly paler, took his seat. "You look familiar, Mr. Keller. Have we met?" Olivia, however, remained standing, gripping the back of her chair as if she feared falling. Her expression transitioned from startled recognition to absolute terrifying comprehension. She was looking at Daniel, yet she was looking at a man she had never known. This man was not boring. He was a force of nature dressed in charcoal wool. "I highly doubt it, Mr. Vance," Andrew replied smoothly, referring only to Ethan. "My work has been primarily West Coast for the last 10 years. Shall we begin? I've reviewed the brief. The numbers on the Apex project are concerning. I require a full presentation on the current capital deficit." He forced them to perform. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan delivered a desperate, high-stakes pitch, while Olivia managed the data points. They were presenting their company's life support to the man they had once jointly dismissed as inconsequential. Andrew interrupted, only to ask surgically precise, devastating questions that exposed the weaknesses and the arrogance baked into their initial strategy. When Ethan faltered, looking to Olivia for help, Andrew focused solely on her. "Ms. Hayes, the projections seem overly optimistic given the market saturation. Explain your strategy for mitigating the risk of obsolescence within the first 3 years. She answered, her voice tight, betraying the shock only through its unnaturally high pitch. But she answered. She had to. She was begging for her corporate survival from the man whose heart she had crushed for lacking edge. As the meeting concluded, and Andrew prepared to deliver his verdict, he allowed himself one moment of cold satisfaction. He did not issue a threat. He issued a condition. "I will consider this," Andrew stated, standing up, an unspoken dismissal in the action. "My decision will be contingent on a full operational restructuring, including, and this is non-negotiable, direct weekly oversight from myself or my appointed delegate. Vance Hayes Media requires a completely new direction. You will send me a detailed, revised proposal by Monday." Olivia watched him, her eyes wide with a terrifying mix of dread and dawning respect. She understood. This wasn't merely a business transaction. This was the commencement of his cold, calculated retribution. She had asked for edge. He had returned wielding a blade. The revised proposal arrived on Monday, predictably lacking the structural changes Andrew demanded. Ethan Vance, still clinging to the illusion of control, had merely repackaged the old strategy with softer language. Andrew, sitting in his temporary corporate apartment overlooking the Hudson, felt a cold surge of exasperation. The man still lacked the self-awareness to recognize defeat. Andrew scheduled a follow-up meeting, but insisted on a new dynamic. He would negotiate exclusively with Olivia. The second meeting took place not in a sterile glass room, but in a discreet, upscale cafe on the Upper West Side, far from Ethan's corporate fortress. Andrew arrived early, choosing a corner table that afforded both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. When Olivia walked in, she looked diminished, the usual CEO steel replaced by a fragile vulnerability. She was alone, as instructed. Andrew did not offer a greeting. He simply slid the rejected proposal across the table. "This is unacceptable, Ms. Hayes. You know it. I'm not here to salvage the past. I'm here to build the future. And Ethan Vance's vision of the future is obsolete." "Andrew, please," she began, using his adopted name hesitantly. "I know what this is, and you have every right. But please don't destroy the company. It's my life's work. You can take all the control you want, but don't let it fail." "You are mistaken, Olivia," Andrew said, his voice dangerously low. "I am not here to destroy anything. I am here to rebalance the scales. The terms are simple. Full controlling interest to Keller Investments. Ethan is completely removed from all executive operational decisions regarding Apex. You, however, will report directly to me, driving the turnaround. Accept or walk away." Olivia's shoulders slumped. She was silent for a long moment, staring at the polished mahogany table, acknowledging the complete surrender Andrew demanded. "He won't accept those terms, Daniel," she whispered, using his real name, the sound of it echoing the ghosts of the past. She finally met his eyes, and there was a desperate sincerity there that pierced the Andrew Keller armor, just slightly. "That is his problem, not mine," Andrew responded, refusing to acknowledge the name. "You think this is all about the contempt, don't you? About me calling you boring? About Ethan having the edge?" She took a shaky breath. "It was deeper than that, Daniel. I cheated because I was weak, yes, but I needed you to divorce me. I needed you to leave before I broke you entirely." Andrew frowned, the revelation confusing his carefully curated narrative of betrayal. "What are you talking about?" "The company, Daniel. My company. The one that consumed me. 5 years ago, when the first debt crisis hit, Ethan helped me cover it. It wasn't just an affair, it was an obligation. He bailed us out, and the price was my silence, my loyalty, and my marriage. He started dictating the direction, squeezing the life out of my original vision. I was trapped, terrified of losing everything I had built, so I made myself despicable to you. I said those cruel things because I knew you were too good, too quiet to ever fight me. I needed the final, brutal shove. Andrew leaned back, processing the unexpected twist. The contempt had not been a sign of her pride, but of her desperation. It did not excuse the infidelity, but it changed the emotional landscape of the decade. The wound wasn't just a simple cut. It was a complex scar of compromised ambition and moral failure on her part, too. So you're saying you traded your integrity for the company and sacrificed me in the process? Andrew's voice was heavy with a cold disappointment, the satisfaction of his revenge suddenly feeling hollow. I'm saying I'm asking you, Daniel, to be the man I always knew you were, the one who builds, not destroys. Take the company, save the vision, and let Ethan pay the price for his own arrogance, not for your past. The air thickened with the weight of her complex confession. Andrew felt the anger, the carefully preserved fuel of the last 10 years, begin to diffuse, leaving behind a sharp, clean ache of realization. The revenge he sought was against a villain who now seemed to be a prisoner of his own making. The moment Andrew returned to Seattle, the carefully compartmentalized worlds of Daniel Hayes and Andrew Keller collided with brutal force. It wasn't Ethan or Olivia who brought the truth to light, but Gabriel, in a moment of stressed exhaustion during a late-night conference call regarding the Apex acquisition terms. Gabriel, believing Clara was out of earshot, had referred to the situation in New York as cleaning up the mess Daniel should have handled 10 years ago. Clara, sitting in the next room, working on a blueprint, had heard it all. She was waiting for him when he finished the call, her posture stiff, her face pale with cold realization. She held a fragile, decades-old photograph that Daniel had forgotten face down in a desk drawer, the one of him and Gabriel from college. Daniel, she stated, the name cutting through the office silence like glass. She didn't ask a question. It was an accusation. Andrew felt the cold sweat of exposure. The meticulously constructed edifice of Andrew Keller began to tremble. He walked toward her, but stopped when she took a cautious step back. Clara, I can explain, he started, the familiar corporate cadence useless now. Explain what? That the man I fell in love with is a lie? That your entire foundation, this Andrew Keller, who is so committed to transparency and ethics, is built on a decade-long secret? Her voice was steady, the lack of immediate anger more devastating than any scream. I accepted your quietness. I accepted your guarded nature. But this is not guarded. It's an entire identity shift. You changed your name, your history, your location, all to run from a bad marriage. He sat down heavily. The powerful CEO was gone. Only the exhausted man remained. He recounted the story, the contempt, the humiliation, the need to disappear. He even admitted the complex truth of Olivia's confession, that the betrayal had been intertwined with her own desperation. The contempt was the fuel, Clara, he finished, his voice raw. It was the only thing powerful enough to make me stand up again. Andrew Keller is what Daniel Hayes had to become to survive her words. Clara looked at the old photograph, then at the man before her. Survival? Or vengeance? You told me you went to New York for a merger, Daniel, but you went back to prove a point to the people who hurt you. You are using the incredible power you built to force them to kneel. That is not healing. It is still being controlled by their past actions. The truth of her words landed with sickening precision. He had achieved monumental success, yet his actions were still dictated by the wounds of a man who no longer existed. He was using his fortune as a complex instrument of emotional torture, trapping himself in the process. When you look at Olivia Hayes, do you see a business partner or the woman who destroyed you? She pressed. Because if you can't separate the two, if the only way you feel powerful is by making them crawl, then the revenge has become your new comfort, Daniel. And that, in its own way, is just as boring as the man she left behind. Andrew stared at the vast cityscape outside, now a meaningless backdrop. He had been so focused on making them pay the price that he hadn't realized the price he was paying. The authenticity of his relationship with Clara, the peaceful man he aspired to be. He realized he stood at the ultimate crossroads. He could complete the retribution, humiliate Ethan publicly, and perhaps lose Clara. Or he could choose the harder, quieter path, relinquish his carefully hoarded vengeance, admit the full complexity of his failure to Clara, and finally, truly, let go of Daniel Hayes. He had built an empire, but the true test of his strength was whether he could tear down the walls of his own resentment. The decision was not made in a moment of dramatic epiphany, but through a long, quiet negotiation with himself. The man Olivia had called boring would have sought a clean victory. The man fueled by vengeance would have sought absolute destruction. Andrew Keller chose something more complex: surgical detachment and strategic mercy. He flew back to New York for a final meeting, accompanied only by Gabriel. He did not call Olivia beforehand. When she and Ethan walked into the meeting room, a smaller, less intimidating space this time, they were visibly tense, expecting the executioner's final blow. Andrew did not let them wait. Keller Investments will proceed with the Apex project, he stated, his voice calm, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. Ethan let out a relieved breath, but Andrew quickly pressed on. However, the terms are non-negotiable and final. Keller Investments assumes 51% control. Mr. Vance is immediately relegated to a non-executive advisory role. Ms. Hayes, you will retain your title as CEO, but your oversight will fall under my direct delegate, who will report all strategy to me in Seattle. This deal ensures the project's survival, but it fundamentally strips Vance Hayes Media of its autonomy. He looked directly at Ethan, who had gone rigid with fury. This is the price of poor management, Mr. Vance. You risked capital and compromised the company's structural integrity. This is the market correcting itself. It was a public, professional castration. Ethan, trapped by the debt and the necessity of saving his wife's company, and thus their life of luxury, could only swallow his pride and accept. Then, Andrew turned to Olivia. Ms. Hayes, you will have the chance to rebuild your company's reputation and restore the vision you originally had. This investment is not a handout. It is a difficult opportunity. You must earn your way back, without the influence that nearly ruined you. He had spared her the total failure, but imposed a heavy, humiliating chain of accountability. He was giving her a chance at redemption, but forcing her to walk the painful path alone. His revenge was not ruin, but forcing them to live with the consequences of their actions under his observation. As the documents were signed, Andrew felt a strange emptiness, not the cathartic relief he had anticipated. The destruction of Ethan's ego felt satisfying, but the complexity of Olivia's situation, her ambition trapped by debt, dulled the victory. The act of revenge was completed, yet the wound remained. Back in Seattle, he faced Clara, sitting across from her in their quiet living room. He didn't wait for her to ask. He simply summarized the New York trip, detailing the cold terms, the stripping of Ethan's power, and his decision to allow Olivia to remain CEO under his watch. "I didn't destroy them, Clara," he said, his voice soft. "I made them accountable. I think I did the right thing, professionally." "And personally?" Clara asked gently. "Personally," he confessed, looking out at the sound, "I finally feel free of the debt. The success of Andrew Keller is no longer a rebuttal to Daniel Hayes's failure. It's just success. I am Andrew Keller because I built this, not because I ran from them." He took her hand, the movement tentative but sincere. "I was scared you would see Daniel, the broken man, and feel the same contempt Olivia did. I was scared of being that man again. But I won't hide from you anymore. I owe you the truth, and I owe myself a life that isn't defined by their ghost." The echo of the past remained, the hurt, the decade of solitary ambition, but it no longer dominated the space. Andrew Keller had finally earned his identity, not by conquering his past adversaries, but by refusing to let them define his future. The most satisfying victory was the quiet peace he found in the simple, honest promise of a future with Clara. The scars were permanent, but the healing had begun.